At the reading of the will, my parents beamed as the lawyer presented my brother, Ethan, with a check for $20 million. They then glanced at me, their expressions hardening, and said, "Go earn your own." I didn't protest. I didn't even react. I simply focused on the grain of the polished mahogany table, trying to ignore the blood pounding in my ears. In that cold silence, something changed. An older gentleman in a dark suit rose from his chair. "There is one final document," he announced, producing a weathered envelope bearing my grandfather's distinct script. My mother's smile vanished. My father's hand began to tap nervously on the table. Ethan's gaze sharpened with suspicion. That single envelope was the first gust of a hurricane destined to demolish the fortress of lies they had so carefully constructed. It all began at a place I hadn't set foot in for over a year. My grandfather's ranch outside of town, where the sound of the wind used to mean comfort but now whispered of buried secrets. The last time I'd been here was the spring before he passed. It was unsettling how a place so ingrained in my memory could feel so alien. Gravel crunched beneath my work boots as I got out of my truck. The old metal wind vane on the barn, once the backdrop to summer afternoons spent tinkering with engines, now spun with a hollow, mournful creak. I hesitated on the porch, my hand hovering over the door. The familiar cracks in the weathered paint, the way the ancient oak tree listed slightly to the south, it was all the same, yet I felt like a trespasser. When the door groaned open, I was met not with the silence I expected, but with a voice as sharp as aged steel. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." My grandmother's posture hadn't softened with age. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set like granite. I stood there, searching her face for any trace of warmth or relief, but found only a cold, hard wall. "Grandma, what's happening?" I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "They said you were busy. They said you'd moved on and didn't want to be contacted." Her voice trembled for a moment before regaining its edge. "Your grandfather asked for you, Leo. Every single day before he died, he was asking for you." The air left my lungs. "That can't be," I called. "I drove out here in April. Ethan was here. He told me no one was home." My grandmother's eyes narrowed into slits. "We were home, Leo. We were always home." A long, heavy silence stretched between us. She turned without another word and walked deeper into the house. I followed her into the dim interior, where the air felt thick and still. She returned with a dog-eared address book. "This is the number he dialed until his fingers gave out," she said, pointing to a line in the book. I recognized his blocky, forceful handwriting immediately, but the number written there was not mine. It wasn't even close. "Grandma, this isn't my number. I've had the same one since I left for college." She stared at the page, her brow furrowed in confusion. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want us finding you, that you were ashamed of this place." "No," I managed, my voice raspy as I leaned against the wall for support. "They lied. They deliberately cut me off from you." Her hands started to shake. She collapsed into the worn leather recliner by the hearth as if her bones could no longer support her. "They told me the funeral was at 2 o'clock, I whispered. I showed up to an empty chapel. She looked up at me, her face ashen. "The service was at 10 in the morning, Leo," she said softly. "They told everyone you couldn't be bothered to show up." My breath hitched. I would have crawled here on my hands and knees to say goodbye to him. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, I felt the first crack in the dam I'd built inside my chest. My vision blurred. I sank to the floor beside her, gripping her hand like I was a boy again. "I didn't know." I choked out. "I swear, I didn't even know he was sick until it was over." Her hand tightened on mine, her touch finally softening. "We know the truth now, son. That's what matters, we know." We sat like that for a long time, the silence filled with years of unspoken words. The old grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick louder than ever, marking the time that had been stolen from us. At last, my grandmother rose to her feet. Her hands were unsteady, but a fire I hadn't seen in a decade burned in her eyes. "I'm calling them," she declared. "Who?" I asked. She didn't reply immediately. She walked to the old rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the one Grandpa always refused to upgrade, and began to dial. Each click of the dial was a deliberate, loaded sound, like a hammer blow. When the line connected, her voice became glacial. "Richard, I need you, Helen and Ethan here. Now." A faint protest squawked through the earpiece, but she sliced through it. "It cannot wait. You have 1 hour." She hung up without a farewell. Then she looked at me. "The lawyer is on his way as well." I stared at her, uncomprehending. Grandpa's lawyer. She nodded. Your grandfather left instructions. Specific things to be read, but only when everyone was in this room together. And that is precisely what we are about to do. I didn't speak. I just nodded. For the next hour, I sat at the scarred oak table in the kitchen, a place where Grandpa used to drink his coffee while I showed him blueprints for go-karts I'd sketched on napkins. The place where he'd listened for hours as I explained the principles of torque and combustion. I looked around at the familiar kitchen, the checkered curtains, the low hum of the ancient refrigerator. Everything was the same, but the very air had changed. Finally, footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. The doorbell rang. Grandma put a hand on my shoulder. You stay here. I'll get you when it's time. From the kitchen, I heard them arrive. My mother's syrupy voice dripped with false sentiment. Oh, goodness. It still smells the same in here. My father's authoritative tone. I thought we'd settled all of this. Ethan's dismissive huff. Seriously? This couldn't have waited until the brokers are finished? Then a beat of silence, and my grandmother's voice, colder than a winter grave. Sit down. Mr. Davies is coming to read Arthur's final wishes. I could picture their faces, a mixture of annoyance and confusion. They had no idea I was just a few feet away. They had no idea what was coming. Frankly, neither did I. But a part of me hoped that someone would finally say what I had always felt in my bones, that what they had done was not family, that their manipulations were not mistakes, they were choices. The front door opened again. A new voice, calm and professional. The lawyer. This should not take long, he said, but it must be followed to the letter. That was my cue. My grandmother's voice cut through the air. Leo, you can come in now. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood and walked through the doorway. 3 heads swiveled in my direction. 3 pairs of eyes widened, their carefully composed masks shattering in an instant. My mother's smile froze on her face. My father's jaw clenched. Ethan went pale. The atmosphere crackled. It wasn't just surprise. It was raw, unfiltered terror. My mother blinked as if she were seeing a ghost. My father tugged at his collar, a nervous habit he hadn't shown in years. Ethan's mouth hung open, words failing him for what might have been the first time in his life. I held my back rigid. If they thought I would shrink, they were about to be sorely disappointed. My grandmother indicated an empty armchair across from them. I sat, my movements deliberate, my breathing steady. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, gave me a brief, unreadable nod before opening his briefcase and extracting a heavy manila envelope. This, he announced, is the final codicil to the last will and testament of Arthur M. Croft, recorded and sealed as per his directive. He also included a personal letter to be read aloud. No one moved. He cleared his throat. To my wife, Eleanor Croft. My grandmother stared straight ahead. I leave our family ranch, the house, and all necessary funds to ensure her comfort for the rest of her days. She knows where to find the rest. He turned the page. To my grandson, Leo Croft. The air in the room grew thin. I could feel it. I leave the Croft Innovation Workshop located at 418 Dust Devil Road, including all machinery, fabrication equipment, active patents, and all intellectual property filed under Croft Applied Dynamics. A sharp gasp came from my mother. Her eyes shot to Ethan. I kept my hands laced together in my lap. Mr. Davies continued. And finally, the remainder of my estate, including all financial holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, shall be divided equally between my 2 grandsons, Leo and Ethan Croft. It was a quiet bomb, delivered with perfect composure. The explosion followed immediately. Ethan leaped from his chair, which shrieked against the hardwood floor. What? He sputtered. He gave him the workshop? The patents? That's my entire portfolio. His voice cracked with disbelief. He jabbed a trembling finger at our parents. You told me. You promised me it would all be mine. You said if I just played the part, kept him happy, that I would get everything. My father's lips formed a thin, white line, but he said nothing. My mother was now staring at her hands as if they belonged to a stranger. I sat, and I watched their world crumble. Mr. Davies raised a hand. There is more. Mr. Croft also penned a personal letter for Leo, which he insisted be read aloud, here, in front of all of you. Ethan let out a harsh, bitter laugh that died in the suffocating silence. Grandma retrieved a folded letter from a side table. He wrote this the week before he died, she said. He made me promise. The lawyer carefully unfolded the creased paper. My grandfather's strong, confident script filled the page. To my boy, Leo, Mr. Davies read, "If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer there to have your back, but my faith in you is, and it is stronger than ever." The words landed like a physical blow, a warmth spreading through my chest. You were always the quiet one, the builder, the one who asked how things worked while everyone else was asking what things were worth. Ethan sank back into his chair, defeated. My mother twisted a handkerchief in her lap. My father stared out the window at nothing. You built your own truths in a family that had no room for them. Something inside me settled. It wasn't anger, not revenge, but a profound sense of being seen. You were never the problem, son. You were the legacy I was proudest of. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to look away. I wanted them to hear every single word. Mr. Davies's voice was a steady anchor in the storm. I saw you with that first engine you rebuilt when you were 12, your knuckles bruised and covered in grease. I saw the light in your eyes when it finally turned over, while everyone else just saw a mess in the garage. My chest ached. I remembered that engine. I still had the crankshaft. I saw how your spirit dimmed when your mother dismissed your projects, the way your father would change the subject whenever you tried to share a discovery. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. I didn't grant her a glance. Ethan was easier for them. The letter continued. He reflected the image they wanted to see. But you, Leo, you were authentic. And instead of trying to understand you, they tried to silence you. Ethan folded his arms, his jaw tight. I don't blame him for playing the role he was given. But you built your own. And that, my boy, takes a kind of courage they will never comprehend. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. I let it fall. I remember the day you won the state robotics competition and asked me to keep the trophy at my house. You said, maybe if they don't see it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm a disappointment. A low, pained sound escaped my father's throat. You deserved a cheering section, Leo. Not to be hidden away. And while I can't change their failures, I can give you what is rightfully yours. A place to build, to create, to be brilliant without apology and without their shadows. Mr. Davies paused, folding the letter with care. The silence that followed was heavy with shame, resentment, and a terrible, ringing clarity. I cleared my throat, my voice quiet but firm. I remember that competition. Mom was at Ethan's debate tournament. Ethan flinched. I came home with that trophy feeling like I'd committed a crime. My father finally spoke. His voice strained. Leo, this is not the time to dredge up the past. No, I said, my own voice gaining a hard edge. It's the only time, because all I ever heard from you two was, why can't you be more like your brother? I turned to Ethan. And you? Every time I accomplished something on my own, you treated it like a personal attack. He sneered. Oh, please. You loved playing the tragic hero. I worked for everything I got. I nodded slowly. You mean you showed up when it was convenient? You smiled on command. You said all the right words because you expected a payout. Ethan's face hardened. And you're so pure? You vanished for years. No, I snapped, the word like a whip crack. I was erased. You told Grandma I wanted nothing to do with her. You gave Grandpa a dead phone number so he could never reach me. That's not disappearing. That's sabotage. My mother shot to her feet. That's enough, Leo. You're twisting things. This family has been through enough. This family, my grandmother cut in, her voice ringing with authority, has been poisoned by lies. And I stood by and let it happen for far too long. My mother stared at her, aghast. Mother, please don't. I watched you. Grandma continued, her gaze sweeping over them. Ignore that boy's worth. I believed your stories when you said he didn't care. I should have known my own blood better than that. My father shifted in his chair. Look, Leo got his special camps, his tools, his education. That wasn't cheap. No, I said, standing up. It wasn't. But you didn't pay for it. Grandpa did. Every camp, every textbook, every piece of equipment. You barely knew what I was studying. You just knew it wasn't business. My voice cracked. You made me feel like I was a liability. He made me feel like an asset. Ethan was on his feet again. This is insane. I was the one who was there. I was the good son. No, I said calmly, meeting his furious gaze. You were the good investment. I was the grandson. He never forgot the difference. And now, none of you get to erase me again. Ethan's face twisted into an ugly sneer. Why should you get anything? Because you're some sad, misunderstood genius with grease under his fingernails? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Number, I get it because I earned his love without a single condition. And that's the one currency you never learned how to value. Then my grandmother stood, planting herself in the center of the room. I regret that Arthur left you a single dime, she said, her eyes locked on Ethan. You may have been present, but you were never there. It was a performance, a long and despicable transaction, and I am ashamed that I applauded it for so long. She turned to my parents. Leave, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. You are no longer welcome in this house. My mother gasped. Out, Grandma repeated, her voice like flint. Now. For a moment they were frozen. Then Ethan snatched his coat and stormed out, his expensive shoes hammering on the porch steps like angry fists. My parents followed, shell-shocked, muttering about lawyers and contesting the will. The front door clicked shut behind them. Not a slam, just a quiet, irreversible finality. The room was suddenly still, not with tension, but with relief. Grandma sank onto the sofa, her hands, which had been trembling, now resting peacefully in her lap. They'll be back, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They always come back. Perhaps, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. But this time we don't have to answer the door. It took a moment for the truth of that to land. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn a place at a table where I was never wanted. Standing there, with the echo of my grandfather's words still warming the air, I finally understood. I had been trying to beg for love from people who were bankrupt. And Grandpa, he had seen it all along. I need some air, I said. She nodded. I stepped out onto the back porch. The familiar creak of the floorboards under my boots sounded different now, not like the past, but like the future. Beyond the fence was the field where Grandpa had helped me build my first go-kart. The engine had seized after 10 minutes, but he'd called it a spectacular failure and we'd laughed until we cried. I thought of that kid, covered in dirt, his eyes shining, and I wondered when I had buried him under the weight of other people's expectations. When I came back inside, Grandma was putting a kettle on. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of age. You know, she said, her back to me, Arthur started designing that workshop for you 5 years ago, long before he got sick. I stared at her. He told me he wanted you to have one place on this earth where you never had to ask for permission to be yourself. I felt the tears before they came. They were quiet and clean, a silent release. That night, I slept in my old room. The ceiling still had the constellations of glow and the dark stars he'd helped me put up, arranged in perfect astronomical order because I'd insisted. The house no longer felt haunted by ghosts. It felt like it was finally mine. The next morning I made coffee and brought 2 mugs to the kitchen table. So, Grandma asked, folding her newspaper. What now? I think I'll go see it, I said. The workshop. She smiled, a genuine, tired, beautiful smile. He would have liked that. Looking out the window, I watched the morning light filter through the oak leaves. For the first time, I felt no need to run, to prove anything, to justify my existence. I didn't feel like a shadow. And that, more than any inheritance, was the first true gift this family had ever given me. My grandfather had left me more than a legacy. He had left me a license to finally begin. The first time I laid eyes on the workshop, it looked more like an old aircraft hangar than a high-tech lab. And that was exactly his intention. Tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, the steel building was unassuming, with massive rolling doors that could fit a semi-truck. But the magic was inside. The space was a cathedral of creation. Polished concrete floors, banks of industrial lighting, and walls lined with every tool I had ever dreamed of. CNC mills, plasma cutters, a 5-axis router, and an entire section for composite materials fabrication, still in its packaging. On a massive steel workbench in the center of the room sat my old engineering notebook from when I was a kid, the one I thought I'd lost forever, filled with impossible designs for perpetual motion machines and anti-gravity engines. He hadn't just built me a workshop. He had resurrected my soul. In the months that followed, the workshop became my entire world. I brought on 2 of my most trusted friends from my engineering program, guys who believed, like I did, that building things could change the world. We started with small contracts, designing custom parts for local aerospace companies, then developed a new, lightweight alloy that caught the attention of a national defense contractor. There were failures. We blew circuits, melted prototypes, and had our proposals rejected more times than I could count. But every morning, I unlocked the doors to a place that didn't demand I be anyone but myself, a place where my intensity wasn't a flaw, but an asset. One evening, after losing a major bid, I sat alone on the cold floor, surrounded by schematics and empty coffee cups. The dream felt impossibly far away. I pulled Grandpa's letter from my wallet, the paper soft and worn from handling. I found the line I'd read 1,000 times and whispered it into the vast, quiet space. You built your own role. It wasn't just a memory, it was a command. That night, I sketched out a new proposal. Not for a corporate client, but for a nonprofit initiative to build vocational workshops in underserved rural schools. A place for kids like me, the ones who learned with their hands, the ones who were told they weren't college material. We called it the Forge Forward program. Our first year, we reached 30 kids. We gave each of them a set of starter tools and a leather-bound notebook with my grandfather's words embossed on the cover. Build the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. That spring, a quiet kid named Sam, who barely spoke a word, showed me a fully functional pneumatic piston he'd designed and built from scrap metal. His diagrams were messy, his math was unconventional, but his mind was pure, intuitive genius. When I told him so, he looked at me as if I'd just solved the mysteries of the universe. You really think it's good? He whispered. I put a hand on his shoulder. I think it's brilliant. And in his eyes I saw it. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about planting seeds in fertile ground and watching them grow, free from the shadows of doubt. The email arrived 3 years after the will reading, from a law firm I didn't recognize, representing Ethan Croft. The subject was terse. Request for site visit. Croft applied dynamics. I steeled myself for another legal battle. But when Ethan arrived, he was a stranger. He wore jeans and a simple jacket, his expensive suits and polished confidence gone. He walked into the lobby of the workshop and just stood there, looking small in the cavernous space. He stopped in front of the portrait of Grandpa that hung over the entrance. He always saw you, Ethan said, his voice quiet. He always knew exactly who you were. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. I'd like to see it, he said. What you've built. I could have refused. Instead, I gave him the full tour. He followed me through the design labs, the fabrication bays, and the testing fields where our Forge Forward students were launching drones they'd built themselves. He asked simple, direct questions. How did you solve the heat dissipation problem? Who funds the youth program? What's your material failure rate? When we reached the student showcase, where their best projects were displayed, he stopped. Kids were gathered around a workbench, laughing and arguing about gear ratios. A young girl was teaching her father how to use a welding torch. Ethan turned to me, his expression unreadable. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said, his voice thick. I needed to see it, what he saw in you. He never apologized with words, but he started showing up. Twice a year now, Ethan volunteers with the Forge Forward program. He doesn't build anything. Instead, he teaches the kids how to write business proposals, how to pitch their ideas, how to present themselves with a confidence he once wore like armor. At the end of his first summer, he handed me a binder. A guide to grant writing for the kids, he said, avoiding my eyes. Thought it might help. Later that night, I read through it. It was insightful, practical, and deeply empathetic. For the first time, I saw a version of my brother I could actually respect. We aren't friends. We may never be brothers in the way most people understand it. But in this world Grandpa built for me, we've finally started telling the truth. And that feels like the beginning of something real. It's been 6 years since that day at the ranch. 6 years since my parents walked out that door and out of my life. I hear about them occasionally, a name in a financial report, a photo from a charity gala in some sunny, remote state. I don't wish them ill, but their memory holds no power over me. My focus is on the work. The single workshop has become a sprawling campus. We've developed 3 patented alloys that are revolutionizing prosthetics. We partner with community colleges across the country to fund our Forge Forward programs. Last month, I stood on a stage accepting an award for innovation, the lights bright in my eyes. Tucked in my pocket was Grandpa's old watch, the one Grandma gave me. Inside the lid is a tiny, faded photo of a 12-year-old me, grinning proudly next to a rebuilt motorcycle engine. He carried you with him every day, she told me. It sits on my desk now, a constant reminder. Sometimes in the quiet moments of the workshop, I talk to him. I tell him about an engine that won't fire, or a kid who just got a full scholarship to MIT. I thank him for not letting me believe I was worthless. His legacy wasn't money or property. It was a compass, one he left behind to guide me back to myself when the world told me I was lost. Most nights, I walk out to the edge of the campus, to a simple steel bench that overlooks the valley. I look up at the real stars, not the plastic ones on my childhood ceiling, and I think of that boy who just wanted to build things, the boy they tried to break, the boy he believed in. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the tall pines, I can almost hear his voice, as clear as the day he first said it. Build the things they don't understand, son. One day the world